Okay, as I said, at the end of the 30 Years' War, the conflict was resolved here with the Peace of Westphalia. But you had two enemies, Spain and France, that continued fighting right where they had a conflict in Catalonia with the different counties, right? And they continued to fight for 11 more years. Also called the Spanish and French War. In 1659, they finally signed the Peace of the Pyrenees, where we get what we today know as mostly Catalonia, right? And Sardinia and Roussillon became French, right? This is why sometimes with the independence movement you see certain towns celebrating even though they're in France. Okay, one thing we mentioned before in mercantilism is the creation of manufacturing industries that are protected by the state. This is called state monopolies. Okay, I mentioned it before. I want you to know this definition very well. Companies that had a charter, or a fuero, right, from the crown, from the kingdom, from the absolute monarch, saying that they were guaranteed exclusive trading rights, that's buying and selling. They are the only ones who can buy and sell certain products in certain areas. So imagine, so this is basically only what happened in the colonies. So, for example, where the Dutch or the Netherlands had a colony, they would, for example, in Indonesia, they would trade spices, but they would say you can only trade spices with the Dutch East India Company, and if you try to trade with other colonial powers or local people, you have to answer to the army or the police or whoever it is. So it's illegal. So what does this do? It gives the monopolies, which are today illegal, powers to set the prices as they want, right? If I'm the only person who can sell you bread, I can charge you whatever I want because you can only buy it from me. So, terribly unfair, would never happen today, but made the colonial powers, especially England and the Netherlands, very, very, very rich. Here's another one. The British East India Company had all this territory, right, where they got tea. Okay, so tea was an enormous worldwide business, and one of the great places to get tea from here. You could only go with one company from one country, the British East India Company. Right? This created the great British Empire that Gandhi then had to fight against. Okay? Alright, the last part is art. So, moving from Renaissance art, the next movement is called Baroque art. So, a couple key words. Grandiose, dynamic, and dramatic. So this is a direct affront to the Protestant idea of simple, austere, hard-working churches, right? They're not supposed to represent Christ or anything to do with religion in any ostentatious way. You're supposed to be simple, hard-working, right? Humble. So Baroque art is associated with the Counter-Reformation, because it was saying, no, absolutely not. We should celebrate God and Jesus and the saints with as much gold as we possibly can. And as much decoration as we possibly can. Okay? So, you see it in things like this. Right? Tons and tons, super, super full of decoration. One interesting one is Solomonic columns, right? From like the Temple of Solomon. Right? These twisty ones that look almost like movement. Imagine with all the candles that, this is the modern age, just after the Middle Ages. This to people was an amazing spectacle to see a church full of candles that had this kind of architecture. It looked like it was almost moving. Okay? The classic example is Versailles, Louis XIV's palace. Right? On the test, I'm not going to ask you specific paintings, but I want you to have some artists that you can recognize them. That's why I highlighted only their names. Okay? So if I show you any of these, I want you to be able to tell me Rembrandt. Okay? One big thing I cut out of this, but that he used, that you can definitely tell Rembrandt, is tenebrism. Okay? It's an extreme contrast of light and shadow. So what we saw in the Renaissance was chiaroscuro, right? Contrast of light and shadow. To highlight what is light is much, much more developed in Baroque. Okay? So it's the background in all these, unless you can see it in person, to us, with any reproduction, looks almost black. Right? This is Rembrandt. You can barely see his face. Right? Because it's like you turn up the contrast on your camera, for example. Okay. Rubens. So, Rubens is super easy to recognize. Not because he has tenebrism, but because he always paints the same kind of women, right? Very, very chubby, kind of things that make you laugh or whatever. But actually in England, right, remember, we talked about the chubby baby Jesus and why in the Renaissance, because food was scarce, thin was not beautiful, but heavy was beautiful because it meant that you were privileged and you could afford to eat, right? And eat more than you needed. So this idea continues throughout history until we have a surplus later. At this time, food was still scarce, okay? So you can remember this very easily because in English, if you want to say that a person, especially a woman, is heavy, but you want to say it in a nice way, like that she's beautiful, you can say she's Rubenesque, right? She's like Ruben, okay? In Spain, José de Rivera, so extremely, extremely realistic, with lots of tenebrism that you have very, very, very clear light and shadow, and more realistic even than the Renaissance artists, right? This is the point where it actually looks more realistic than a camera, than a photo, okay? This one, more from Rivera, right? Look at when you can see them in the PowerPoint, you can see it better, because even the resolution we have here is not very good, but it's perfect, 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 every fold of skin. Okay, Zurbarán also is very, very easy because he almost always painted the same things. Friars, okay? He wasn't quite as good as getting kind of a lifelike, or maybe it was his style, getting a lifelike glint in anyone's eye, so they look a little bit like models, more like people, okay? That's Zurbarán's style. Okay. And Esteban Murillo obviously did a lot of religious painting, but he's also known for using tenebrism and making extremely realistic paintings of daily life as well. So this is supposed to show poverty, right? The kids eating the food with bare feet. Okay? And finally, I assume everybody will know Velázquez. Okay? One thing he does that I do want you to recognize is aerial perspective. So this is another way that the painting style tries to imitate the way that the human eye sees life, is that when something is closer to you, you can see more detail. When it's very far away from you, the details become fuzzy. So that's what he did, aerial perspective. So he's reducing the color intensity and the detail of the background objects. Okay? So when you're close to him, you have better detail. When you're far away, it starts to look blurry. Okay? Besides looking darker and smaller. Okay? So let's make sure we know we have Christ crucified, the triumph of Bacchus. We know from the Renaissance that that's the god of wine. Okay? Vulcan's Forge, right? Where they made, these are iron workers, right? Blacksmiths. Okay? Table of record, lots of data. Right? So you have, again, very good mathematical perspective. Here on the back. These are better when you can see them in the bottom. Same thing, surrender of Breda from the Battle for the Spanish Netherlands. Venus. Right? Perspective. And Las Meninas. Remember, what's so interesting about this is that you actually have, this is the beginning where artists start to put their own self-portraits of themselves painting it in the painting itself. So really take a look at this in the PowerPoint because you can see it better on your computers at home or on your phone. But you have the monarchs here, right? An important duke here, and then the foreground ruler goes from the knees with the artist here. Okay? One more, the Count Duke of Olivares. And just remember, you only need to recognize the artist. Okay?